Shanghai's Sunday paints a picture opposite to that of the sprint, proving that in a grid where cars are closer than they seem, setup choices and on-track execution make the difference. McLaren bounced back with an excellent reaction from Saturday as the track and the balance of the MCL39 came together. George Russell and Max Verstappen prevailed over a damaged and disqualified Ferrari, which paid the price for a lackluster qualifying performance, excessive setup corrections, and difficulties in stabilizing the floor. The Chinese Grand Prix once again highlights the invaluable advantage of running in clean air. Both in the sprint and the main race, the aerodynamic turbulence from traffic prevented pursuers from expressing their full potential, while helping the tire management of those at the front. The evolution of the cars has now brought overtaking difficulties back close to 2021 levels, rewarding strong qualifying performances, a quality derived not only from talent, but also from the Maranello team's overall approach. However, the clear track enjoyed by McLaren and the traffic ahead of Ferrari alone do not fully explain the role reversal seen within 30 hours. Pirelli chief engineer Simone Barra explained that, after the sprint, teams had the opportunity to change their setup. He suggested that some teams might have tried to protect the front tires more for the race, making adjustments to shift the balance forward and reduce understeer. The severe graining experienced in the sprint served as a warning, encouraging teams to be less aggressive with setup, especially on the front tires. But on Sunday, McLaren and Mercedes were rewarded, as their qualifying times in Sector 3, which is dominated by traction zones, suggest they sacrificed the rear axle less to protect the front. Graining and degradation turned out to be lower than expected, thanks in part to track rubbering, which had been evolving constantly since Friday. Additionally, the track temperature dropped from 37 degrees Celsius in the sprint to 31 degrees Celsius by the end of the Chinese Grand Prix, frustrating a Ferrari that thrives in the heat and further reducing tire wear. Finally, the durability of the hard compound, which was used for the first time on Sunday, surprised everyone, benefiting those who had compromised less on performance and balance to manage the front tires. The conditions on Sunday rewarded the reigning champions' choices, allowing them to bounce back after a disappointing Saturday at the 5.451-kilometer Shanghai International Circuit. The victory also stemmed from Oscar Piastri's sensitivity in securing pole position with the fastest car at the time, which, however, appeared abrupt and prone to mistakes. The Australian thus delivered a crucial 1-2 finish to capitalize on McLaren's current technical advantage. A nod also goes to Lando Norris, who skillfully managed a rear brake system failure, where the brake-by-wire system coordinates the disc brakes with electric regeneration. The first fully dry weekend of the 2025 Formula One season confirms McLaren's initial superiority, though it appears less dominant than pre-race impressions suggested, showing vulnerability in the medium and long term. On a track that limits performance due to graining and front tire degradation, already an Achilles heel of the 2024 project, Oscar Piastri's race pace advantage on hard tires is 2.5 tenths over George Russell and Max Verstappen, and less than 3 tenths over Ferrari. It remains to be seen how much the Australian managed his pace and whether his teammate had even more potential in clean air. Suzuka and Jeddah, two other tracks that challenge the front end, will provide answers. George Russell steps onto the podium for the second time, a well-deserved recognition for a driver who has been near flawless in the first 2 weeks of the year. The Briton and Mercedes built their result on Saturday, finally managing to extract performance from a soft tire that had seemed unmanageable since the Australian Grand Prix. Third place comes on a front-limited track, a favorable characteristic for the 2024 car. However, the W16 single-seater also proves deadly in traction phases, as Charles Leclerc experienced firsthand, confirming itself as a more complete car than its predecessor. Unlike in Australia and the sprint, Red Bull came alive at the end of the race. The RB21 lacks pace compared to McLaren, but its drivability, at least by Max Verstappen standards, makes it a solid starting point. The Dutchman prevailed over Charles Leclerc in the final laps, though the Monegasque's race pace assessment cannot ignore the damage to his front wing. If the 30 points of downforce loss reported via radio are confirmed, this would translate to a lap time deficit of 2 to 3 tenths per the typical data provided by teams, further amplified by the inevitable increase in front tire wear. Unsurprisingly, in the race, Charles Leclerc struggled particularly in medium-speed corners 8 and 9, which had been strengths in previous sessions. These mitigating factors, however, do not change the impression that the SF25 was far from its sprint form, and not only due to the loss of clean air. Ferrari's Sunday lack of pace was not solely due to concerns over skid block wear, the resin plank beneath the floor. Lewis Hamilton's disqualification for exceeding the regulatory 1 mm wear limit suggests that Ferrari did not run significantly higher than intended, but it still indicates an issue in that area. This further supports theories regarding the sudden drop in performance in Australia, stemming from difficulties in managing vertical oscillations. The impression is that Ferrari needs to learn to precisely control ride heights with a suspension that has undergone changes in linkages, internal mechanics, and therefore forced transmission. This affects performance as well, as seen in the SF25's drop-off from the sprint to the Grand Prix. All teams, not just Ferrari, had to adjust ride heights since race conditions with more fuel on board, different speeds, and varying aerodynamic forces completely change how the car interacts with the track. More than absolute ride height, it is the stabilization of the aerodynamic platform that matters, as inconsistencies compromise the floor's performance. Lewis Hamilton, however, pointed to other mistakes made on Saturday. The British driver stated that he didn't know who claimed they changed the ride height. He acknowledged that they made other changes, including to the ride height, but nothing significant. The 7-time Formula One world champion added that, when considering all the changes, the car had worsened significantly. The compromises in balance did not provide the expected benefits in tire management, influenced by significant track evolution. Setup choices exacerbated the weaknesses of the SF25's rear end, already evident in Australia, ironically somewhat offset by the damage to Charles Leclerc's front wing. Nonetheless, Ferrari remains an improvement over Melbourne, and the gap to McLaren is not insurmountable, but a swift reaction is needed after a disastrous start to the 2025 Formula One season. Despite the outcome of the Chinese Grand Prix, Ferrari team principal Frederic Vasseur remains optimistic, believing the gap to McLaren is manageable. He also praised the cooperation between Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc, dismissing the misleading team radio coverage by the Formula One management. Fred Vasseur drew a comparison between McLaren's current form and Red Bull's dominant start to the previous season, which eventually faded. He recalled that after Red Bull won the first 2 races, he was asked whether they could secure the title by June, to which he had responded with caution. Vasseur acknowledged McLaren's strong pace and impressive performance, but emphasized that it was still too early to declare the championship over. While Ferrari is trailing McLaren by 61 points in the constructors' standings, the French manager considered the deficit far less daunting than Red Bull's dominance in the previous year. He highlighted that in the 2024 China sprint, Max Verstappen started from 6th and won by 16 seconds, which seemed like a definitive result at the time. However, he pointed out that things changed as the season progressed, and by the end of the year, Red Bull had arguably fallen behind Ferrari. Fred Vasseur stressed the importance of staying calm and focusing on their own progress, despite the challenges. He acknowledged the positives from the weekend, such as Lewis Hamilton's win, his pole position, and Charles Leclerc's race pace. However, he also noted ongoing issues, including Hamilton's struggles in qualifying and the team's difficulties with race pace. He pointed out that Ferrari was still pushing the limits of both car and team performance. At the start of the season, Ferrari had planned to reassess their development priorities after the initial races. However, Fred Vasseur believed it was still too early to make any definitive judgments. The former Alfa Romeo team boss reflected that if conclusions had been drawn after Melbourne's FP2 or even after Saturday's sprint, the team would have felt confident. Yet, just a few hours later, they were struggling. He emphasized that he didn't think they had yet maximized the potential of the car.